People think money reveals who is rich. They're wrong. It reveals who still has a conscience. The first thing I noticed wasn't the money. It was the silence. Friday nights at Bellissimo's were usually loud enough to drown out my own thoughts. Crystal glasses clinked beneath golden chandeliers. Soft jazz drifted through the dining room. Expensive perfume mixed with the smell of garlic, butter, and freshly baked bread. Wealth had its own scent, and after 4 years of waiting tables in Manhattan, I could recognize it before anyone even opened the front door. My name is Emily Carter, and at 27, I worked every shift I could get. Breakfast at a neighborhood cafe, lunch at a diner across town, dinner here, where businessmen ordered bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly rent. None of it was enough. Not after Lily's medical bills. Not after insurance found another reason to deny another treatment. Every dollar I earned already belonged to someone else before it ever reached my hands. I adjusted the white apron around my waist and balanced another tray of empty plates against my shoulder. My feet ached after 12 straight hours, but smiling had become part of the uniform. Customers tipped happy servers, even when those smiles were borrowed. Lily sat quietly in the corner booth reserved for employees' families, coloring in an old notebook while waiting for my shift to end. 7 years old, blonde curls falling over bright blue eyes. She had learned far too early how to entertain herself. Every few minutes, she looked up just to make sure I was still there. I always smiled back. That tiny exchange was enough to keep both of us going. Around 8:30, the atmosphere inside the restaurant shifted without anyone announcing it. Conversations softened. The manager straightened his tie for the third time in a minute. 2 men wearing perfectly tailored charcoal suits entered first, scanning the room with calm, practiced eyes before stepping aside. Then he walked in. Vincent Moretti didn't need to raise his voice to own the room. He simply existed inside it, and everyone else adjusted around him. Tall, dark tailored suit, silver watch catching the warm light, calm gray eyes that never seemed hurried. He nodded politely to the hostess as though he were just another customer instead of the man every employee suddenly wanted to impress. He took the table by the window alone. No grand entrance. No unnecessary conversation. He ordered black coffee, grilled sea bass, and sparkling water. His voice was low, respectful, almost ordinary. If I hadn't noticed how every staff member watched him from the corner of their eyes, I might have believed he was just another successful businessman finishing a long week. I served his meal without incident. He thanked me each time I refilled his glass. He asked about the dessert menu but declined it with a quiet smile. 40 minutes later, he stood, buttoned his jacket, placed a generous tip beneath the receipt, and walked toward the exit. Nothing unusual. At least that's what I thought. Then Lily's small voice floated across the restaurant before anyone else noticed. "Mom," she whispered, pointing toward the now empty table with wide eyes. That man forgot something. Resting beside the untouched coffee cup was a thick brown envelope, slightly open at one corner, just enough for neat stacks of crisp $100 bills to catch the light. My heart stopped for a second. The envelope looked too heavy to contain ordinary paperwork, and the narrow opening revealed enough crisp $100 bills to make my hands feel suddenly cold. Around us, the dinner rush continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Glasses clinked. Servers hurried between tables. A couple near the fireplace laughed over dessert. Nobody else had noticed what Lily had seen. She looked up at me with complete innocence, still holding the purple crayon she had been using moments earlier. "Should we run after him?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard before answering. "No, sweetheart. We take it to the manager first." Even as I said the words, another voice inside my head whispered something very different. $50,000. Maybe more. Enough to pay every overdue hospital bill sitting unopened on my kitchen counter. Enough to replace the old sedan that stalled every winter morning. Enough to move Lily into an apartment where mold did not creep across the bathroom ceiling every rainy season. Enough to breathe again. I hated that those thoughts came so quickly. I hated them even more because they felt human. I reached for the envelope carefully, surprised by its weight. It felt almost unreal, like holding someone else's future in my hands. "Emily." My manager's voice snapped me back. Daniel hurried over, lowering his voice as soon as he saw what I was holding. His eyes widened for the smallest fraction of a second before he forced a professional smile. "Bring that into my office," he said quietly. "We will take care of it." Something about the way he said it unsettled me. There was no urgency, no suggestion that we should notify security or contact the customer immediately. Just quiet confidence. Too quiet. Lily slipped her tiny hand into mine as we followed him toward the hallway leading to the back offices. Halfway there, she gently tugged on my sleeve. Mom. I looked down. What is it? She glanced at Daniel, then back at me, lowering her voice until it was barely louder than a whisper. He did not forget it. I frowned. What do you mean? He looked at our table before he walked outside. Her blue eyes remained fixed on mine. He smiled at me. I felt a chill run across my shoulders. Children notice details adults ignored. Before I could ask another question, Daniel unlocked his office and closed the door behind us. He reached toward the envelope. Leave it here, he said. I will handle everything. My fingers hesitated. Should we call the customer? I asked. There must be a reservation under his name. Daniel smiled without meeting my eyes. Do not worry about that. Something inside me tightened. Lily looked from him to me again, her little forehead wrinkling with concern. Then she quietly asked the question neither of us expected. If it belongs to someone else, she said, why does nobody seem to be trying to give it back? The room became strangely still. Daniel's hand froze in midair. Mine tightened around the envelope. Outside the office door, I heard the restaurant entrance open once more, followed by slow, measured footsteps, returning across the polished marble floor. The office door opened before either of us could move. Daniel immediately stepped back from the envelope, his polished smile returning so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Vincent Moretti stood in the doorway with the same calm expression he had worn throughout dinner, his charcoal suit still perfectly pressed, his silver watch catching the warm light from the hallway. He did not appear rushed. He did not appear concerned. He simply looked around the small office until his gray eyes settled on the envelope resting in my hands. Good evening, he said politely. I believe I left something behind. Daniel laughed a little too quickly. Of course, Mr. Moretti. Emily was just bringing it to me, so I could contact you. Vincent's eyes never left mine. Was she? The question was simple, but the room suddenly felt smaller. I stepped forward before Daniel could answer again. I think this belongs to you. I held out the envelope with both hands. For one long second, Vincent made no attempt to take it. Instead, he looked at Lily, who had quietly moved beside me without making a sound. She stood there in her faded blue sweater with one crayon still tucked behind her ear, completely unaware that every adult in the room seemed to be holding their breath. Vincent lowered himself slightly, so his eyes were almost level with hers. Did you find it? He asked. Lily nodded. Yes, sir. And you knew there was money inside? Another small nod. I could see it. He smiled gently. Did you count it? She shook her head. No, sir. Why not? She looked confused by the question itself. Because it is not mine. Daniel shifted his weight uneasily beside the desk. I could almost hear him hoping the conversation would end, but Vincent remained focused on Lily. Do you know how much is inside? No, sir. It is enough to buy many things. Lily looked up at me before answering. My mom says everything important cannot be bought anyway. I felt my face grow warm. I barely remembered saying those words. Probably months ago, after telling her we could not afford another toy she had admired through a department store window. Children collected. Conversations adults forgot ever happened. Vincent finally reached for the envelope, but instead of taking it, he gently pushed it back toward me. Open it, he said. I stared at him, convinced I had misunderstood. Excuse me. Please. Daniel immediately interrupted. Mr. Moretti, I do not think that is necessary. Vincent never looked away from me. Open it. My fingers slowly loosened the seal. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills exactly as I had expected. Beneath them rested a single folded white card. I carefully removed it and unfolded the thick paper. There were only 6 words written across the center in elegant black ink. If you found this, what now? I looked up, unable to hide my confusion. Vincent watched my expression with quiet patience, almost as though this moment mattered more than the money itself. Lily leaned closer, trying to read the card from where she stood beside me. Then she whispered the words that seemed to stop time itself. It was never forgotten, was it? Vincent looked at Lily for several long seconds, and for the first time since I had met him, the quiet confidence in his gray eyes softened into something I could not immediately recognize. It was not surprise. It was not amusement. It felt more like recognition, as though a door he had closed years ago had quietly opened again without anyone touching it. He straightened slowly and slipped both hands into the pockets of his tailored coat. "No," he answered gently. "It was not forgotten." Daniel let out a nervous laugh. So this was some kind of business experiment? Vincent glanced toward him, and the manager immediately fell silent. "Not business," Vincent replied calmly. "Human nature." The office became so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind Daniel's desk. Vincent looked back at me. "For the past 6 years, I have left that envelope in different places. Restaurants, hotels, airport lounges, private clubs, public cafes, different cities, different people." I stared at him, trying to understand what I was hearing. "Every time," he continued, "someone made a choice." My fingers tightened around the white card. "And what usually happened?" A faint smile crossed his face, but there was no happiness behind it. "Some people kept everything. Some took part of it and returned the rest. Some convinced themselves they deserved a reward for being honest." He paused before adding quietly, "Very few returned it untouched." Lily looked up at him. "Did that make you sad?" The question seemed almost too simple, yet Vincent did not answer immediately. His eyes drifted toward the restaurant window beyond the office door where snow had begun falling outside, soft white flakes floating beneath the city lights. It reminded me that people often believe desperation gives them permission to become someone else, he finally said. Sometimes it does. I felt the weight of those words settle inside me, because only minutes earlier I had imagined exactly what $50,000 could fix. I had pictured hospital bills disappearing. I had imagined a better apartment, a safer neighborhood, a future where Lily never had to hear me whispering over unpaid invoices after she fell asleep. I had not touched the money, but I had certainly imagined it. Vincent seemed to read the thought across my face. "Thinking about taking it is not the same as taking it," he said quietly. "Need speaks loudly. Character simply speaks last." I lowered my eyes, embarrassed that a complete stranger understood me so easily. Then Lily tugged gently on my sleeve again. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Vincent nodded. "Of course." She tilted her head with the serious expression children wear when trying to solve grown-up mysteries. "If nobody ever passed your test, why did you keep trying?" For the first time that evening, Vincent looked genuinely caught off guard. A small breath escaped him before he answered. "Because I hoped I was wrong." His voice was softer now, almost distant. "I hoped one day someone would remind me that goodness still exists when nobody is watching." Lily smiled as though the answer were perfectly ordinary. "Maybe you were looking in the wrong places." Vincent blinked once. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was quiet and brief, but completely real. Outside, the snow continued falling over Manhattan while somewhere beyond the office walls the restaurant carried on as though nothing remarkable had happened. Yet I could not shake the feeling that our lives had quietly changed the moment a little girl chose honesty over everything money could buy. Vincent left the envelope on Daniel's desk without another word about the money. Instead, he folded the white card, slipped it into his coat pocket, and looked at Lily as though she had handed him something far more valuable than $50,000. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled and shrugged. "My mom says thank you is free." His expression softened again before he nodded once. "Your mother has taught you well." I felt awkward accepting a compliment that I was not sure I deserved. Every lesson I had tried to teach Lily had been born from necessity, not wisdom. We could not afford to lose trust, because sometimes it was the only thing we still owned. Vincent turned toward me. "You have worked here a long time?" "Almost 4 years," I answered. "And before that?" "A diner in Brooklyn." "Before that?" "Wherever I could find work." He studied me for a moment, not in a way that felt intrusive but thoughtful, as though quietly assembling pieces of a puzzle. "You have family nearby?" I glanced at Lily before answering. "Just her." He nodded slowly without asking another question. Somehow his silence carried more respect than sympathy ever could. Daniel finally cleared his throat. "Mr. Moretti, would you like us to prepare another table? Dessert, perhaps?" Vincent shook his head. "No, I have everything I came for." The words lingered strangely in the room because I was certain he was no longer talking about dinner. He reached into his jacket and placed a simple black business card on the edge of the desk. There was no logo, no title beneath his name, just Vincent Moretti and a phone number embossed in silver. He gently slid the card toward me. "If your daughter ever needs help," he said calmly, "call this number." I immediately pushed it back. I appreciate the offer, but I cannot accept something I have not earned. He looked down at the card before smiling almost imperceptibly. Interesting answer. He left the card. Exactly where it was. Keep it anyway. Whether you use it is entirely your choice. Before I could respond, he wished us both a pleasant evening and walked out of the office with the same measured steps he had entered with. Nobody followed him. Nobody tried to stop him. The restaurant seemed to exhale only after the front doors quietly closed behind him. Daniel waited several seconds before turning toward me. His smile had disappeared completely. You should probably throw that card away, he said, pretending to organize paperwork on his desk. People like him do not do favors without expecting something back. I looked at the black card resting against the polished wood. Somehow it felt heavier than the envelope had. Lily reached over and picked it up with both hands before I could stop her. She studied it carefully as though reading a story hidden between the silver letters. He looked lonely, she said. Daniel laughed under his breath. Lonely is the last word anyone would use to describe Vincent Moretti. Lily quietly placed the card into my apron pocket anyway. Maybe everyone else is wrong. I looked down at her gentle face, then toward the snow falling beyond the restaurant windows. For reasons I could not explain, I had the uneasy feeling that this evening had not ended with a goodbye. It had only introduced us to a story that none of us yet understood. While somewhere across the city, Vincent sat alone in the back seat of a black sedan, looking out at the same falling snow. Hearing the words of a 7-year-old girl echo louder than any business meeting he had attended in years. Sleep never came easily after that night. I lay awake listening to the old radiator click inside our tiny apartment while snow tapped softly against the bedroom window. Lily had fallen asleep almost instantly, one hand wrapped around the stuffed rabbit she had carried everywhere since she was 4. Children had a remarkable gift. They could walk through extraordinary moments and still find peace before midnight. Adults carried those same moments like heavy suitcases for years. The black business card remained on our small kitchen table beside a stack of unpaid medical invoices. Every time I walked past it, I told myself I would throw it away. Every time I reached for it, something stopped me. Not hope. Certainly not trust. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe the quiet certainty that accepting kindness and depending on kindness were two completely different things. The next morning arrived gray and bitterly cold. I bundled Lily into her winter coat before dropping her off at school and rushing across town to my breakfast shift. By noon, I was already halfway through another 8 hours on my feet before hurrying back to Bellissimo's for dinner service. Life had a way of pretending nothing important had happened, even after your world had quietly shifted. As I tied my apron in the employee locker room, Maria, another server, hurried toward me with wide eyes. "Emily, have you heard?" she whispered. "He came back this morning." I looked up from my locker. "Who?" "Vincent Moretti." She lowered her voice even further. "Not to eat, just to speak with the owner." My stomach tightened for reasons I could not explain. "About what?" She shrugged. "Nobody knows." They stayed inside the office for almost an hour. Before I could ask another question, Daniel walked through the dining room, carrying a clipboard. He looked strangely exhausted, his tie slightly crooked, dark circles visible beneath his eyes. It was the first time I had ever seen him look nervous before opening for dinner. Throughout the evening, he barely spoke to anyone. Shortly before closing, he gathered the staff together near the front counter. "I have an announcement," he said, clearing his throat. "Effective immediately, every employee will receive full health insurance coverage through the restaurant." Confused murmurs spread across the room. Daniel continued before anyone could interrupt. "Hourly wages are increasing by $3 an hour, beginning next pay period. The Employee Emergency Assistance Fund is also being expanded." Maria gasped beside me. One dishwasher actually applauded. I stood perfectly still, unable to process what I was hearing. Bellissimo's had never offered benefits like these. Daniel looked uncomfortable accepting everyone's gratitude. The owner decided it was time for some changes, he said quickly before dismissing us back to work. Yet something about his voice felt rehearsed. As the others celebrated, I noticed him glance toward me for only a second before immediately looking away. Much later, after the final customer had left and the lights were being dimmed, I walked outside into the freezing night air. Snow still covered the sidewalks in thin white layers that sparkled beneath the streetlights. Across the street, a black sedan sat quietly with its headlights off. I could not see who was inside. After only a moment, the driver pulled away smoothly and disappeared into traffic without sounding the horn or drawing attention. I told myself it was only another luxury car in Manhattan. I told myself not every black sedan belonged to Vincent Moretti. Then I reached into my apron pocket to grab my gloves and felt something folded between the fabric. It was a small white envelope with my name written neatly across the front in elegant black handwriting. And I knew with complete certainty that it had not been there when my shift began. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope beneath the glow of the streetlight. I expected cash, a check, maybe another impossible test. Instead, there was only a single sheet of cream-colored paper folded neatly in half. The handwriting matched the card from the restaurant. Thank you for reminding me that integrity still exists. Please accept nothing from me because of this letter. Keep living exactly as you already are. The world needs more people who make your daughter's kind of choices. There was no signature. It did not need one. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Somehow those simple sentences felt heavier than the $50,000 ever had. The next morning began like every other. I packed Lily's lunch, walked her to school through freezing winds, and promised I would be waiting outside the front gate when classes ended. She hugged me tightly before running toward the entrance. Halfway there she stopped and turned around. Mom. Yes. Do you think Mr. Vincent has anyone waiting for him after work? I smiled faintly. I do not know. Sweetheart. She looked thoughtful. I hope somebody does. Children worried about things adults never admitted were missing. By late afternoon, I was rushing toward the elementary school when my phone rang. The caller identification displayed St. Andrew Children's Hospital. My heartbeat quickened instantly. Every unexpected call from that number usually meant another problem with Lily's treatment schedule. I answered before the second ring. This is Emily Carter. The woman on the other end spoke warmly. Miss Carter, I am calling regarding Lily's cardiology appointment next month. I closed my eyes, already preparing myself for another insurance denial. Yes. We wanted to let you know that her procedure has been fully approved, and all remaining balances have been cleared. I stopped walking. The sounds of traffic faded into the background. I am sorry, I whispered. Could you repeat that? Your account now shows a zero balance. Someone established a private foundation grant this morning specifically covering pediatric cardiac patients who were waiting for financial approval. Lily qualified immediately. I leaned against the brick wall beside the sidewalk because my knees suddenly felt weak. Who created the foundation? There was a brief pause. I am afraid donor information is confidential unless the donor chooses otherwise. I thanked her automatically before ending the call, but I remained standing there for nearly a full minute, staring at nothing. It could have been anyone, I told myself. A charity, a corporation, an anonymous benefactor. Yet deep inside, I already knew whose quiet handwriting was folded inside my purse. That evening, after Lily had finished her homework, someone knocked gently on our apartment door. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, stood outside holding a freshly baked apple pie wrapped in a towel. I almost forgot, she said with a cheerful smile. A very polite gentleman stopped by earlier. Said he was delivering something for the building. She handed me a small potted white lily with a handwritten tag tied around the stem. There was no name. Only one sentence. Kindness grows best when nobody is watching. Lily hugged the flower pot against her chest as though it were treasure. Mom, she whispered, smiling up at me. I think Mr. Vincent is trying very hard not to let us thank him. I looked through the frosted apartment window toward the quiet street below. Parked beneath the bare winter trees sat no black sedan, no waiting driver, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Yet for the first time in years, the loneliness inside our little apartment seemed just a little smaller. While somewhere else in the city, a man who had spent years testing strangers had quietly begun testing something far more difficult, whether he still remembered how to believe in people. The morning of Lily's procedure arrived wrapped in cold winter sunlight that spilled across the hospital windows like quiet hope. Hospitals had always carried a familiar smell to me, disinfectant, fresh coffee, and people trying to be brave for someone they loved. I had walked these hallways countless times before, but never without the crushing weight of wondering how I would pay the next bill. This time felt different. Not easier, just lighter. Lily squeezed my hand as we rode the elevator to the pediatric floor. She looked up at me with a smile that seemed far too calm for a 7-year-old preparing for surgery. Do you think everything will be okay? She asked. I brushed a loose curl away from her face. I think you are the bravest person I know. She giggled softly. I learned from you. Those words stayed with me long after the nurse gently wheeled her toward the operating room. When the doors closed, the silence rushed in all at once. Waiting was its own kind of test. Minutes stretched into hours. Parents sat quietly beside one another, holding paper coffee cups that had gone cold long before anyone remembered to drink them. Some prayed. Some stared through the windows. Others simply waited because there was nothing else they could do. I found an empty chair near the far corner and closed my eyes for just a moment. Miss Carter. I opened them to find Dr. Reynolds standing beside me with a warm expression. Everything is going exactly as expected, he said. Relief washed over me so suddenly that I had to steady myself against the armrest. Thank you, I whispered. As the doctor turned to leave, he hesitated. There is someone who has been here since early this morning. He asked not to disturb you. Before I could ask who he meant, the doctor nodded toward the opposite end of the waiting area. I followed his gaze. Vincent Moretti sat alone near the large windows overlooking the city. His suit jacket rested neatly beside him. A paper cup of untouched coffee had long since stopped steaming. There were no bodyguards surrounding him, no assistants answering phones. He was simply sitting there with his hands folded together, quietly watching snow drift across the skyline. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I walked toward him. He stood as I approached, offering the same respectful nod he had given me the night we first met. You came, I said softly. I made a promise to myself, he answered. I intended to keep it. I searched his face. The foundation, the hospital, the letters, the flower. It was all you, was not it? He did not deny it. Instead, he looked toward the operating room doors before speaking. Years ago, I believed money solved problems. Then I discovered it only solved the problems that could be counted. His voice remained calm, but there was an honesty inside it I had never heard before. Your daughter solved one that could not. I felt tears gather despite every effort to stop them. Why us? He smiled faintly. Because I left an envelope on a table expecting to measure honesty. He paused, his gray eyes reflecting the pale winter light. Instead, a little girl measured the man who left it behind. Neither of us spoke after that. We simply stood together in the quiet hallway while snow continued falling beyond the glass, until the operating room doors finally opened and Dr. Reynolds stepped forward wearing the kind of smile every parent waits a lifetime to see. Dr. Reynolds removed his surgical cap and smiled before he said a single word. Sometimes hope arrives quietly, without celebration, because it already knows it has changed everything. The procedure was successful, he said. Lily is going to make an excellent recovery. My legs almost gave out beneath me. Months of fear, sleepless nights, and impossible decisions dissolved into a single breath I felt like I had been holding for years. Tears blurred my vision as I thanked him again and again, barely hearing anything after the words successful and recovery. Vincent remained a respectful distance away, saying nothing, allowing that moment to belong entirely to a mother and her daughter. An hour later, I sat beside Lily's hospital bed while she slept peacefully, her tiny hand resting in mine. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor no longer sounded frightening. It sounded like tomorrow. A nurse quietly entered the room carrying a small white gift bag. Someone left this for Lily, she said before slipping away. Inside was a simple children's storybook about a little sparrow that returned a lost seed to an old gardener instead of keeping it for itself. On the first page, written in familiar handwriting, were only 8 words. Never lose the heart that found the envelope. There was still no signature. There did not need to be. 6 months passed faster than I ever imagined. Lily grew stronger every week. The color returned to her cheeks. She laughed more loudly. She ran farther across the playground than she ever had before. For the first time since she was diagnosed, her future no longer revolved around hospital calendars and insurance forms. Mine changed too. With the employee benefits at Bellissimo's and fewer medical worries, I finally saved enough money to rent a tiny storefront only 3 blocks from the restaurant. It was nothing fancy. White walls, old wooden tables I refinished myself, fresh flowers near the front window every Monday morning. Lily insisted we call it Lily's Corner because, according to her, every good place deserved a name that made people smile before they walked inside. On our opening day, customers trickled in slowly. Neighbors, families, Construction workers grabbing coffee before work. Around 9 o'clock, the bell above the front door chimed softly. I looked up from the espresso machine and smiled before I even realized why. Vincent Moretti stepped inside wearing a dark wool coat instead of an expensive suit. No one inside the cafe recognized him. To them, he was simply another customer escaping the cold. Lily noticed him first. "Mr. Vincent," she shouted happily before running across the room. He knelt to her height as she wrapped her small arms around his shoulders. When he stood again, I saw something I never expected. Peace. Not complete, not perfect, but real. He ordered a plain black coffee and chose the small table beside the window where winter sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. Before leaving, he placed enough cash on the counter to cover his drink and quietly tucked something beneath the ceramic sugar bowl. After the door closed behind him, I lifted it carefully. It was the old black business card I had kept all those months. Across the back, in the same elegant handwriting, were 5 simple words. "You never needed this anymore." I smiled as I slipped the card into the pages of the little sparrow book Lily now carried everywhere. Looking through the window, I watched Vincent disappear into the morning crowd, no longer searching for honest strangers because one little girl had already given him the answer he had spent years trying to buy. People often believe the greatest fortunes are counted in dollars, buildings, or power, but I learned that the richest lives are built one honest choice at a time, because money can test a person's character, yet only kindness has the power to rewrite someone's destiny.